Hello, this is Dan at SonicLAB, and today I'm reviewing Softube's Heartbeat drum machine. So Heartbeat is the first software instrument from Softube, and it's a virtual drum synth inspired by the Japanese analog drum synths from the 1980s like the Roland TR-808 and 909. But Heartbeat is not a straight emulation, it actually uses its own analog synthesis modeling and a few waveforms to generate its sounds. It also includes its own mixer, a sound layering tool, some great effects, and you get all the controls in one big single window. There are 8 instruments included, 2 bass kicks, 2 snares, hi-hat, 2 percussion modules, and a cymbal. According to Softube, the first bass kick was inspired by the Roland TR-909, whereas the second bass kit was based on the Roland TR-808. In fact, there are both individual and global presets for those drum machines if you're interested in that particular sound. As you can see, the global presets have a good selection covering many electronic music styles, and also the manual has a quick tutorial on how to achieve a few of these sounds. Let's have a listen to some of these global presets. Now, if you would rather come up with your own drum sounds, there are a few parameters you can tweak for each instrument. One of the things I like about the Heartbeat actually is the variety of sounds you can achieve with just a few parameter changes. For the first bass kick, for example, you have the decay, attack and attack type, from electronic to acoustic, pitch controls, harmonics to add a nice distortion. Now, another important parameter to define the bass kick is the EQ down here. By the way, each EQ in the mixer is optimized to work in the sweet spot for each instrument, which actually improves the workflow massively, I think. The second bass kick is even simpler than the first, and it definitely has a different character to it. The harmonics, for example, are more subtle. The first snare also doubles as a rim shot. You can mix the wave and synth parts to get different sounds and change the character of each with the type knobs. The wave type knob ranges from a snare to a rim shot. And the synth type knob goes from a pitched note to a noise sound. You can find similar controls for the second snare, which also doubles as a clap. And the hi-hats. There are 2 identical percussion instruments which are very versatile. The sound source can be single or dual triangle wave oscillator, FM synthesis, and noise. Last but not least, the cymbal with 3 parameters: decay, ring, and pitch. This is the mixer section. The main idea here is to give you the tools to create your drum tracks inside Heartbeat. They have included the very useful EQ I mentioned earlier, auto panning, as well as the usual pan and volume controls. The auto layer machine is a tool for layering sounds, which is great to make big sounding bass kicks or snares, for example, or use the attack of one bass kick and the decay of the other, and so on. It can also be used to create short sequences, such as drum fills, but it's not like a traditional sequencer. There are 4 different channels, and each can be triggered with a single MIDI note. So let's just concentrate on one of the channels. There are 4 layers for each channel, which will play in unison, unless you delay the sounds with the delay knob. So these are the 4 elements I'm going to layer. First I'm going to layer the first bass kick. then the second bass kick, the first snare, and then the second snare. Now, one thing I like to do is to send the snare, for example, to the echo effect. And the auto panning. You can do things like that very quickly. You can delay each layer in milliseconds or bit divisions, which are synced to the track's BPM. You can create different patterns like a flam and drum fills. The chaos slider is basically a tool to randomize beats, and it's good to create different variations of drum fills at the end of each bar, for example, or to generate different textures by combining sounds in different ways. If you look at the direction of the arrows down here, that will give you a clue about what's going on. By default, the sounds play from top to bottom, and each layer has a decreasing velocity value. Moving the slider to the next position on the right, it increases the possibility of playing the layers upwards. The next two positions might trigger layers from neighboring channels. Now the last position includes all previous possibilities, randomly triggering any sound from any layer, and it's very difficult to anticipate what's going to sound like, although it's obviously full of possibilities. There are three effects: dynamic processor, delay, and reverb. The dynamic processor and the reverb are adapted versions of plugins that Softube also sells separately. Softube specializes in signal chain processing, so you should expect very good quality in this regard. The delay and the reverb can be set before the compressor in the signal chain. You can also solo them if you just want to use the wet sound from the drum machine in your mix. All three modules have individual presets, though it is not possible to save your own presets independently for any of the effects or instruments, unfortunately, but only globally as part of the whole drum machine using your DAW's preset management system. The compressor is based on the Valley People Dynamite dynamic processor from the 1980s that adds its own sound character. It is a very versatile piece of kit. It is very easy to get certain results like gain pumping or ducking, for example, with no side chains or any other routine necessary. And this is because the kick is hardwired to the dynamic processor, although none of the other instruments are. Let's try some ducking. So here the bass kick is lowering the volume of the rest of the drums every time it plays. But what do you do if you want to duck the rest of the mix, for example the bass, every time the bass kick plays? Or say you want to try some parallel compression. Well, Heartbeat is a multi-channel output instrument, so you can send any of the instruments through their own separate outputs by passing Heartbeat's own effects and master bus. This is also handy when you want to process any of your drum sounds using other effects plugins like your favorite reverb or compressor. The filter echo is a delay effect, a very relevant effect to dance music production, like many of the features we have covered, and it's great to enhance the groove with little bouncy delays here and there. It has a very simple but effective interface. You can do filter sweeps, and of course it can sync with the song's BPM. The TSAR-1D is a great sounding algorithmic reverb, again with very few parameters and very easy to use. At the top of the interface you can find the MIDI mapping options. The instruments are mapped starting from the note C1, which is usually the first octave on a MIDI keyboard. If you need to map the instruments to your controller in a different way, you can use the learn function or change the note value. One thing to bear in mind is that if you changed back to a factory preset, the MIDI mapping will revert to the default C1 note. So if you have remapped Heartbeat to work with your controller, it's best to save your own presets, otherwise you will lose your mappings. To map any other of the parameters of Heartbeat, you'll have to use your digital audio workstation mapping functions. This is the master bass section, and it applies to the whole drum mix. It includes a saturation control to add a bit of distortion. It also includes several filters and a couple of very handy controls. The mono cut, which ensures mono compatibility and avoids phase issues in the low frequencies, and the stereo width to widen or narrow the stereo image of your drums. At the bottom of the interface you can find the velocity section. This section increases the expressive capabilities of the instruments by linking the MIDI velocity to parameters like volume, pitch, attack and decay. Now with the bass kicks and the percussion modules, you can create some basic bass lines by using the velocity to pitch knob. This way, the velocity of the note will change the pitch of the instrument depending on how hard you hit the MIDI key. I have noticed that the pitch knobs show percentage, but I would personally prefer to have them show hertz or cents, for example, so the drums could be tuned following some musical values. This is the time gate effect. Now this effect I really like, and I used to achieve it by editing the audio directly or setting up a noise gate plugin. But here it is as simple as turning a knob. It basically cuts short the decay of the instruments. Personally, I think it's a shame that it does not go below 20 milliseconds, because then you would be able to generate clicks and glitchy stuff, which I quite like. To me, one of the great things about software instruments is that you can automate individual parameters, but what I also like to do is to automate preset changes, so as to use different drum kits within the same bar, for example, also known as preset surfing. Unfortunately, Heartbeat doesn't support incoming MIDI program changes to automate preset changes or to navigate them from a MIDI controller, which is very useful in a live situation, by the way. Luckily, I have been told that Softube is planning to implement this in the near future. It seems to me like Softube have thought hard not only about the sounds, but also about usability and how to integrate production techniques used in electronic dance music, and have come up with an instrument that makes it very easy and quick to achieve great sounding results. It's simple enough to get started quickly by using the presets, for example, but there are also many options to come up with your own sounds. And for those of you who might feel restricted by the internal routing or effects, you can always use the multi-channel outputs to process the drums with other plugins, for example. The only two buts I would place on this instrument are the inability to save your own individual presets for each instrument or effect, and the lack of MIDI program changes support. So, summing up, Heartbeat is a tool made for electronic dance music production, with great sounds and effects, and a simple layout that packs a lot of functionality. Heartbeat works on Windows 7 or newer, and Mac OS X 10.7 or newer. I run a 3 GHz i7 processor, and it's showing around 20-25% of CPU within Ableton Live for 2 instances of the plugin. So you will need a fairly powerful computer to run this plugin. The install is about 800 megabytes, but this includes all of Softube's plugins, not just Heartbeat. And then at some point during the installation process, you'll be activating your chosen plugin. To activate the plugin, you need to install an iLok license manager software and follow a few simple steps. You do need an internet connection to activate Heartbeat, or the other option is to use a USB iLok key. Thanks for watching. That's all from me. See you next time.